We just have a couple slides.
Yeah, just to kind of set the stage, and then we'll go into Q&A of all the things.
So let's do that. We'll start with a presentation from community development.
Sure.
And then we'll just open up for a Q&A for as long as we need to.
All right.
We've got Denise here, we've got Luke here.
Joanne? Yeah.
Right. So, hey, so we've got the whole crew here. Unfortunately, our city manager is deathly ill. And thought it was best if she does not come and spread whatever awesomeness that she has for all of us here. So, thank you, everyone. So we're just going to start with the presentation.
Terrific, thank you. So this is really, my name is Denise Sanderson. I'm the interim director for community development. And this is really just a rehash of some of the data that we shared the other night at our commission meeting, and just sort of wanted to set the stage for the sphere in which the Q&A can be easily addressed. So just briefly, as of last week, we had received 2,500 permit applications. And as you can see, we've issued over 1,600 permits. That number is getting very close to 1,900, I think, at this point. So that data is just a little bit old. We had initially set a goal of 75 permits a day. As we've moved through this process, we've realized the complexity of dealing with the SISD package reviews, formerly known as a FEMA packet. And so we've modified that schedule or that goal a little bit. We're still short of goal, as you can see, but making a lot of strides in getting permits issued, not just in the total numbers, but in the daily permit count. So we're now also starting to track our building inspections. So most building permit applications require anywhere from 3 to 5 inspections. Is that fair to say? Rough electrical, drywall screw, those kinds of things. So multiple inspections per permit is quite common. And then we'll talk the substantial and non-substantial damage determinations. We're still struggling to get data from Tidal Basin. We did receive some information last week and this week. Very often what they send to us is duplicate data sets of previously received data, which can be frustrating. So as an example, in December, we received over 6,000 records, 75% of which were duplicates of data previously received. So it's a struggle with them on a continuing basis, but we're doing the best we can with that. When we do get the data, we have to look for those duplicated records. So it takes a little bit, and then we post substantial and non-substantial damage determinations, and you can see how it's breaking down currently. I'm very confident the way that the appeals process has been going, that you'll see at the end of all this, as a percentage, the number of substantially damaged structures will be relatively low, certainly much lower than what we anticipated when we first came onto the island following the storms and seeing the level of floodwaters around here. So we do expect that number to come down substantially, if you're the pun, as we move through this process. And in getting through that process, we do offer an appeals process. If you've received a substantial damage letter, or if you've received a calculation of damage that you disagree with, there is an appeals process, and we can talk through that as well. I don't know that every appeal has been successful, but by and large, if you provide us good information, you can feel quite confident that we're going to be able to get to the other side of that and issue a non-substantial damage letter. We've had a couple of odd cases where we've issued a non-substantial damage letter and a homeowner has wanted us to reverse that as well, so that they can take advantage of full insurance claims and perhaps pursue grant opportunities that may become available at some future point. So that's really all that I have. We have with us Luke Curtis. He is our building official. So anything permit, inspections, floodplain management, all the stuff really. Luke can probably answer any question. We'll ask Joanne to do the same. She's our permit administrator, so she can tell you about the nuts and bolts about taking in documents and what we need to see and what generally holds you up in a review process. And I can answer some of the other stuff that maybe they struggle with, although I can't imagine you will. And then of course our elected officials. And so we have 4 of them. Do you all want to introduce yourselves? I know everybody knows you.
Betty Rosnicki, District 3.
David Petrola, Mayor.
Lisa Robinson, District 2.
Karen Marriott, District 1.
Great. So Luke, Joanne, we're on the hot seats. We can take any questions that you have related to the process, what you've experienced, any suggestions that you have. I have a notepad, I will write things down.
I have a question because it's come up to me from a couple individuals. For drywall, back to the wonderful world of drywall. Price per square foot versus price per labor hour. Which are acceptable?
So,
Because I know we've got the labor chart with the hourly rates, but there doesn't appear to be one for a square foot.
and there isn't always a square foot charge. Give you an example. If you go into a room and there's no windows, there's a single door, it's just straight cuts all the way around, flat ceiling. It's a lot easier to do that. So it might be just how many sheets, how many hours, whatever. It's gonna be simple. As opposed to looking at this room, you have all the doors to go around, you have the coffered ceilings that need all those cuts, a lot more detail. So the prices can vary, and in some instances, it wouldn't be a square foot or even a sheet charge. It's just gonna be somebody estimating how much time is it gonna take me to hang this, and tape it, finish it.
So with that being said, then you're looking for what kind of layout or diagram of the room?
Yeah, ultimately, yeah. I'm not going to require a layout or even a floor plan if they say, you know, for example, we're cutting up 4 feet, removing the drywall, repairing the electrical, and then putting it back. I don't need to see anything as far as a floor plan. But if they're moving walls around, then yeah, then that gets a little bit more detailed. We need to see a floor plan. What's the existing? What are you changing it to?
Okay, so back to then, if it's just a simple 4-foot cut for a room, obviously they're not going up to the ceilings because they didn't get damage up to the ceilings. So they wouldn't be doing that being 3-foot, 4-foot cut, whatever that is. Could they still use a square foot price, or
Yeah.
what is an acceptable square foot? Because that's not listed in the labor chart. Or the labor
So-
rules.
Yeah, it just depends on who's working up the proposal and how they figure it. There's, you know, half dozen different ways that they might figure it. So it's just whatever they propose, I'll evaluate, or the plans examiners will evaluate what they're proposing. If it makes sense and the numbers look realistic, then we'll go with it.
Thank you.
No problem.
I think the most important message for anybody, whether it's a contractor or an owner builder, is keep good records. However you arrived at that number that ultimately went on your SISD or permit application, just make sure you're holding those documents in a file, because whether we need to see them or a female auditor needs to see them, and they will be auditing households, they'll pull records and perhaps wish to see backup documentation. Just keep good records so that you can, a year or 3 years from now, walk through the mental process of how it is that you came to the information you provided.
You got a question? Not everyone at once. Yes, sir.
I'll pick it up. Are you using BLS numbers, or are you publishing these rates of labor, unskilled, drywall, plumbing, or are you using BLS? What are you using as benchmarks?
I can answer that, Blake. So Bureau of Labor Statistics, FEMA signed off on us utilizing May 2023 for the Tampa St. Pete market. And I have published the numbers and we'll be able to provide that list for you. Mark, do you know where those papers were?
They're all on the guys.
Oh, great. I'll get them for you. I'll hand them to you. There's a variety of construction related labor costs on there. And so those are the ones that you can use for your record keeping. I'll hand those out.
A couple people comment about whether their plan did or didn't go through review with the fire marshal. Is there any standard on that?
So any commercial project, and when I say commercial, it's anything that's not 1 or 2 family.
Okay,
So everything else has to go through a fire review.
okay, so somebody who's in a condo building with 7 units, they would go through a fire review where a single family house wouldn't necessarily. All right, thank you.
Yeah, the fire code does not apply to 1 and 2 family residences. So for
That's 1 to 4, correct? 1 to 4, correct? 1 to 4, correct?
no, there's one or two family residences.
Triplex on quad?
Triplex would apply. So that would have to go before the fire marshal for review.
So even those are considered as single family residential, they still.
So
they
it,
have to.
it looks at the structure. Now, the one caveat there is, let's just take a row of townhouses. Now, each townhouse is looked at as a single family residence. The difference being is there's a firewall that goes from the foundation to the roof. So that is, the building code is looking at that as a separation. So each of those is looked at as a single family. So in a triplex, if there was the same scenario, if there was a firewall in between them, then that could be looked at as single family, but it has to meet certain criteria.
You require any single family homes to be smokes to be intact or not?
Yeah, so for, the question was about smoke detectors in a single family home. So Florida statute, Florida building code, no matter what work is being done, requires smoke detectors to be installed as per the building code, no matter what you're doing. You could be replacing your kitchen cabinets or replacing your windows, but code requires that. This is one of two elements where it says you have to do this, even if you're not touching it. If you're not doing electric, you have to do it. There are some provisions in there, so that doesn't have to be hardwired under certain circumstances, but that is one thing that has to be done. The other thing that falls in that same line, and it's grouped in with life safety, is pool alarms. So if there aren't existing pool alarms, no matter what you're doing, it requires that code to be met.
Yeah, I know that's come up a couple times in some of the emails that we've exchanged with residents. You know, and as much as we would like to say, you know what, just skip it, right? That is part of the Florida building code that we and any city is held to. We don't have an opportunity to skip or opt out of that. So when you're doing any kind of major renovation, you know, those two items, those two alarms really need to be brought up to current code. While other things might remain grandfathered in, those two cannot break.
That's correct.
What are you saying there? So no matter what you're doing in your house, you need to put in a pool alarm?
So the way Florida statute is worded, no matter what work you're doing in your house, if you pull a permit to do, doesn't matter, windows, roof, any work triggers this requirement. So if hypothetically you don't have pool alarms existing, then the inspector could say, where's your pool alarms?
Regardless of fencing as well?
Correct.
Now, do we also have to put in a golf alarm? Because the golf is like right next to the.
Not yet, at least.
For these types of issues, I'll be happy to give our state representative's phone number as well. And the governor's office, because that's who you have to petition to make those changes, right? So those are, again, those are things that any city, any municipality, any county is subject to when you go into the Florida building code.
Please understand, it's the way these rules are set up. It's not to put a hardship on anybody, but it is looking at a minimum set of safety standards. You might be surprised how many people die from, kids and adults die from falling in a pool. I have a friend who 2 years ago, his elderly father fell in a pool. Nobody knew about it until they were getting ready to leave, and they looked for him and he was face down in the pool. So it doesn't matter, it's not just kids. Deaths happen all the time from these pool, from people falling in pools. Again, just a minimum set of safety standards.
How long has been in effect? This law?
For as long as I've been doing this, so I've been doing this for 10 years. And I don't know how long before that the code was in place. But
Well, I know-
I think people look at it, yeah.
Yeah, 2004, it wasn't because there was alarms or pool fencing.
Yeah.
So none of that pool fencing is then therefore grandfathered in.
so there's a couple different parts to the section. So there's a pool barrier.
Mhm.
But so if you think of, I need a whiteboard. So when you think of a house, it has a fence around the backyard of the pool. When there is access from the house to that area, whether it's a door or a window, that's the trigger that has this pool alarm requirement. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can come about doing this. You can have a net that's UL listed, or I can't remember it's not UL, it's ASTM. But it's a standard that has been tested, and you can put a net over the pool and you don't need the alarms. There's multiple different avenues to satiate that code section. But it's when there's access from the house into that pool area, then the general term is, those doors and windows have to be alarmed or some form of protection.
Okay, so the barrier is still valid?
Yeah, so there's a couple different parts to the code section, but yes, it does have to have a pool barrier.
I don't need to throw away my pool fencing.
No.
And if they swim up from the Gulf, you don't need a barrier from that side.
Correct. So if they don't drown in the Gulf, more than likely to be okay.
Yeah, the question I have is from several residents regarding private providers. So we've heard that we can't do private providers here, and they're just asking why not? What's the guidance? Because I've looked to try to answer, and I can't find the guidance. It says-
Yeah, we asked for the legal, we asked legal for their legal opinion on that, and you can't do it under BFE. Above BFA, you're allowed to do private providers for inspections,
Right.
but below, you cannot do it. It's Florida statute.
Right, so that's what we've heard, well, we haven't, so what I'm asking for is, because we've heard you say that, we want this statute so we can, because that hasn't been provided, and that's what they're asking me when I say, well,
That was provided in when we had our commission meeting a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And there was a specific request and a legal opinion rendered by the city attorney.
Okay.
So if you don't have a copy of that, you can send me an email, you can send the city clerk an email, public records request, and we can provide that legal opinion as well.
Yeah.
Where it actually does go through every step and why. Yes, it would certainly be easier in many situations.
Right.
And one of the things that, we've done over the last 4 months is as we're going through the city permitting process, right? And you've seen this. We've systematically eliminated a lot of red tape that we found. Right? So there are certain things on the books. For example, Denise, you and the commissioner had this conversation back and forth several times. Why are we asking residents to add a 20% overage if they're doing their own work?
Yeah.
Right? And there's many things like that we found that just been on the books for a long time, and the cleanup hadn't been done. Right? And so what we've done systematically as we find these items, we're eliminating them off the books so that we can streamline the process, so that we can get to a point where we can issue permits faster. And one of the things, if you saw the presentation, we're caught up to January 15th now?
Yeah, we're maybe running a week behind before,
A week.
I would suspect, so.
Last Tuesday was 2 weeks behind. And so just to put that in context, right before the hurricane, we were running roughly 90 days to permit submission to permit issuing. And now we're at a point where we're lagging behind 1 week from when you submit a new permit.
I'll say that with a caveat.
Sure.
So there's intake, and before it's released from intake, our permit technicians, Joanne oversees them, make sure that it's sufficient and complete and can be reviewed. So it's when we issue it for review to get, from the time it enters the review cycle until it is reviewed is typically now less than a week. It's whether or not we can issue them is subject to all of this stuff. And what we're finding, our biggest challenge is quite honestly, it's owner builder permits. It's insufficient information provided in that permit or SISD review package. Things don't jive. There's a lot of back and forth. And so I can't promise you that we're averaging a week on issue, but we're hitting roughly a week before we're able to get that in the review queue to get to that. So we've staffed, we're up to, I think, 11 plans examiners. We're really, now the inspections are really starting to accelerate. So we're adding a bunch of inspection personnel as well. We just onboarded somebody today from a contract firm. But so we're trying to respond as these needs, start presenting themselves in different ways, but
So
it
one
is
thing-
still a challenge on the owner builder permits.
So
for
that's
sure.
one of the things that we've heard quite frequently, right, is, and the reason is because none of us here, right, none of us residents are out, well, most of us aren't contractors, right? So we don't know the building, the Florida building code inside out. We don't know how many inspections you have to ask for. We don't know when you have to ask for inspections. So there's a part of, that's part of the burden that you're assuming, part of responsibility, assuming that when you're going to the owner builder. So that said, what resources do we have available for people to come in and sit with somebody and say, look, I am going to do a rather owner builder. Help me navigate this process so that, because what happens, and I see it so many times, where it's like 20 emails back and forth, right? Because the building official says one thing, hey, we still need this, and he might be using a technical term that the resident doesn't understand, and they submit something other than what was requested. And so a lot of that is, it's just part of the challenges when you're working with, non-industry, professionals and all the bills. And we do have that right in Florida, and I've taken advantage of it myself. I don't take advantage of it myself again. Pretty handy. But at the same time, I'm also emailing the permit department myself and saying, hey, how do we do this, right? So what resources do we have for residents to come in and sit down with somebody and help them navigate through the process so that they're not sending 20 emails back and forth and maybe getting everything kind of resolved in one sitting or maybe two sittings?
So as you know, when the storms first hit in November, we went to a Monday through Friday and Saturday extended hours for permit intake. And most of that time, we talked about this at commission, most of the time is really working with residents in particular to help inform them along the way. There were so many questions, very much like you're describing. We realized that it was keeping us, we knew, and we got to a critical point where it was keeping us from being able to process effectively because we were spending too much time standing at a desk rather than moving things through electronically. A couple of weeks ago, we implemented a volunteer program, got a wonderful response from the community. It's truly been remarkable. We had to cut off the call for volunteers because I couldn't train them fast enough. But we now have a volunteer program, folks who have, including some contractors that have been through this process. They go through a 2-hour training with me and Joanne, and they've been staffing here. They have access to us throughout the day for questions as they arise, but they have been remarkable, learning from each other and working with particularly owner builders and working on the paperwork to get them set for submittal. The goal being, from our perspective, is complete and sufficient documents that quickly get through a permit review process, because that's our biggest challenge, is getting good quality documents. So that's been really good. We've been through 2 training classes, so we're still ramping up that volunteer program. We have
one coming?
yes, every Tuesday morning from 9 to 11. We have 36 volunteers last night, maybe 38. We get a couple that somehow end up on the list. But we also have a mission request in for the state. So how this works is if we can't fill the ask locally, it goes to the county, then to the state. And Adam's been a big part of helping us get things escalated to the state when necessary to be able to get additional resources. And so we have asked for an additional 10 personnel to come in. I'm hopeful that they'll be here next Monday. It always takes much longer than we anticipate in filling these missions, unfortunately. But with 10 folks coming in, the goal is to partner them up with volunteers and to go out into the community, into particularly some of our older population, some of these folks that are really kind of lost in the process, confused by all of it, want somebody outside of maybe a shady contractor to take a look at what's going on and guide them in that process. And so that's how we intend to utilize the volunteer program. In addition to having them here 9 to 1, they're either in our lobby or in our chambers, depending on availability every day. But to also be able to utilize them out in the field to help us reach those populations that need some extra support.
Yeah, I greatly appreciate you taking my suggestion.
Yeah.
And running with it.
It's
Denise, now that we have so much more help on the owner builder side of things, one thing that I've heard from a number of contractors is that they're like, man, like, I know the game, I know how this works, but there's some stuff that you guys do that's different than St. Petersburg or Treasure Island or other places. And I have homeowners yelling at me because their permit's being held up and the city is telling the homeowner that, like, well, we've asked your contractor for more information and haven't gotten it, and the contractor's going like, I know this is a 3-minute conversation and I cannot get anyone on the phone. Is there any chance that now that we've got like this whole team of volunteers who's gonna be so much more effective at helping the owner builders, that we might be able to have a, you know, like a contractor hotline to get some of this stuff sorted out, or some ability for those guys who are like, you know, I don't need a 2-hour sit down with somebody. I need 3 seconds with the person who's doing my permit review on the phone to clarify something, and then this whole thing will be good to go.
So there's a couple, we don't have a contractor hotline. I'm not saying that that would be something we couldn't do, but I'm worried that that number would get out to non-contract.
That's not the right thing, but.
But we have implemented a new phone system, and there's been a couple of hiccups along the way. It used to be when you called the main number, it went to Patty at our front desk. She was also dealing with the hordes of people that were here at, 6:40 or 7:45 every morning. And she was just unable to route phone calls quite often. And so we know that most phone calls went unanswered. A new phone system was implemented the first week of January, I think. And those calls now go directly into a group, it's a main number and you pick from a menu. I think our department sits at the top of that menu. And so those calls come in and then they get routed to the various sections. And so it's still not fully resolved because first day we had 500 phone calls come in to our permit technicians alone. And they just cannot get to them, particularly if they're standing at a desk, right? So we're trying to solve for some of that by rerouting phone calls to staff a desk, and that's what we're doing now. We have a desk that is staffed all day long to answer phone calls. To get specific with the contractor, I would suggest the best thing they can do is send a note in the system and say, can you please call them? That I would suggest, because we could do that.
Okay.
It's being able to answer all of those calls is just still a problem, although I think the volume has slowed down significantly. Is that correct?
I think the best case scenario is for us, being permit intake, the contractor wants to come in and talk to us about the review that was done, not by us.
Right.
We're not licensed to answer those questions, and even if we know the answer, we're not going to answer it because they're going to say, oh, Joanne told me that I could do this, da. So we're not going to do that. So best case scenario for us would be that the resident or the contractor reply to the reviewer. And we had a scenario this morning. I had a nice gentleman here and he had a fence and he came in because his contractor told him, you need to go in there because they don't know what they're doing. Well, the reviewer sent a comment to him and he never responded. So as I was up at the desk, I said, well, let's send them an email again and I'll CC you on it. So the resident is here. He wants to know what's going on with his fence. So for us, it would be the contact, the reviewer with the contractor, the reviewer with the homeowner, whoever pulled the permit.
I haven't tried to pull a permit since the storm, so. Before, but when the plan is reviewed, does the contractor or the homeowner have any idea who that person is, or it's just there are comments and they have to respond?
Yes, there should be an email sent to them from the reviewer.
From the specific reviewer?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
And they should be able to email that reviewer back and get an answer.
I have one because I just got mine today. And it actually came from somebody else, but in the reviewer is different. So I don't have a direct email to the reviewer. It's to the assigned person. Does that make sense? Assigned to Darla Alford,
Yeah.
and the reviewer is somebody else.
Yes.
So am I going to Darla or am I
No,
going to?
You're going to the reviewer. Assigned to is the person that did the intake on the permit.
Okay,
So if I took in your permit, my name would be on there. You don't want to respond to me, you want to respond to the reviewer.
but I don't have an email for Kathy that's listed on here as the review status person.
Did she send you a,
It came from Darla.
okay,
It was a reply from Darla.
I'll get you Kathy's.
Okay. I'm just saying
Yeah, so
it sounds easy, but it doesn't
Right.
actually follow
Yeah,
that flow necessarily.
and that should flow that we want.
Right. So just pointing that out to you, it
That's the most
doesn't,
efficient way to do it, because then you have
Right.
Residents or contractors waiting out there for 2 hours to get an answer about a review,
It's.
and then they come to the desk and they're not happy with us.
Right.
Because we can't answer or we're not able to, we just.
Well, and it makes
Yeah.
perfect sense, other than the fact that I don't have her email.
So if it's in the portal, right, so if you log in to just go to safetybeach.org, you click on permits, and you click on look up permits, you can look up permits by your name, address, or permit number, right?
Right.
And you should be able to see the comments in there, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so probably the best time, even if you don't see your emails, check the portal first. Would that be the first step to do, is check the portal first? And from there, you can reply to the comments, correct?
Right.
Okay,
Exactly.
and that way, yeah, so, and you have access to that, your contractor has access to that. Everybody has access to that, right? And you can communicate right from there.
Exactly.
The other thing I think is important to know, if whomever applied, so if that came in from, on a contractor application or an owner builder application, when we ask for comments, it has to be from the applicant. So if we're asking, if a plans examiner is asking for comments on your permit, but your contractor submitted it, your contractor must respond because they are the applicant. In most cases, we don't communicate with a non-applicant. We do so as a courtesy. We'll share with you what the plans examiner has said perhaps, but it's the contractor who is responsible for that building permit application. And so in most cases, we typically, certainly under Blue Skies, we typically won't communicate with the non-applicant.
Well, I do know that there are times when comments, certainly pre-storm, there were times when comments on a permit application would get emailed to the contractor and not ever uploaded into the portal. You know, so that, you know, you might have a contractor in a situation where you're saying, well, just upload comments into the portal, but what he's commenting on is not in the portal.
Right.
You know, and so it gets a little disjointed there.
How are they, am I helping the process or making it worse? I'm working with an architect, I'm getting the plans done, but I was hoping that in parallel, I'd be putting it out for bid, but at the same time, I was gonna try to submit my plans, get that process going. And then, once I select somebody, then do a notice of commencement. At the beginning, do it myself. With that,
As an owner builder,
I'm sorry?
owner builder.
Okay, so it would be, okay, and then it would be, that's not bad.
So what John is saying is so he has a lot of work that's gonna be on his plate for the next year or two, right?
Yeah.
And so he's gotta go through getting architects, engineers, general contractors. It's gonna be a long drawn out process. Now we have the free permits until almost the end of April, right, for this, if you have a hurricane impacted home. And he might not even get to that. He may be well beyond that deadline before he's ready to submit the entire package, or you might be in that same situation. And so what you can do in that case is just submit your permit as an owner builder. And then when you hire UGC, we substitute or we amend the package to reflect a general contractor rather than owner builder. But at least that way you're getting into the queue and you're able to take advantage of the free permitting process while we still have it available. So right now it's over $2 million at this point that we've issued in free permits. Right, and we have reserves for another couple of months. So, if you have a home and you haven't submitted a permit yet, Karen.
But I need plans, right? I have to at least have plans.
Yeah, you have to have at least a semblance of a game plan, right?
So if I may, so it just depends on what you're doing. I don't know the scope of your work. So in general terms, if somebody says, I'm tearing up the drywall that got wet, repairing the electric and putting it back in the creek, I don't need plans for that. But if it's more expensive, like question was raised, there's a house that got flooded, and had a fire, and they need structural plans for repairing that fire damage. So in that scenario, we would need plans for it.
Okay.
But it just depends on the scope of the work. We might or might not need plans.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll just mention, so we're waiving plans examination and permit fees for repairs and demolition, but new construction, because of the level of review required, those are not waived. Even if your home was destroyed and you had to demolish it, the new construction permits are not waived.
What's the date exactly, do you know?
April 22nd.
I have a couple of questions for the residents, but before I ask my questions, I want to sure if anybody here has another question in the audience. Or...
Well, I've got a bunch of them, so.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
We're here.
That's Scott, so.
I just want to close out mine. Just one, so the Florida statute, I can get the actual statute number from Amber more unless Luke has it by top of your head.
So. Well, I can't remember the
Well,
Florida
that
statute.
was a legal opinion. I think we should allow the attorney to finish the legal opinion. Since they've already provided a legal opinion, you can just get your copy of the legal opinion.
Yeah, it references both Florida statute and 44 CFR, the federal regulation.
That's right,
Yeah.
thank you, that's.
And
what I was-
that's all I was gonna.
Yeah, yeah, there's two laws that are impacting that.
You say when the attorney's written the opinion. We should just-
Yeah, no, I was just, it's, the 44 CFR is chapter 44 of the Code of Federal Regulations. That plays a part into it. That's all I was gonna say is, it's not necessarily a statute, but that could.
Thank you.
Sir?
So, when you close out your SD permit, you get this one SD package through and you close it out. And along the way, there were things that you wanted to do that of course, while you're at it, you wanted to do this, this, and this, but you were pushed over that 50%. Are you stuck now? Like, you close out that permit, let's say 2 weeks later, I want to go through and gut my back. Are you stuck with this math on the property, or do you reset everything once you close out that first SD permit, or the only SD permit?
So you hit it exactly right. On December 23rd, commission got rid of the 1-year look back, and that is a result of FEMA sharing with us an interpretation we had not considered before. So for a dozen years or more, the city had interpreted the federal regulation in such a way that substantial improvement was looked at as substantial damage. FEMA clarified that a damaging event, all costs, including things that previously we had excluded, like impact windows, as an example, all costs associated with returning a structure to its pre-damaged condition tied to an event must be included in the calculation. And so we went to the minimum standard on December 23rd, got rid of the look back, which also got rid of exclusions. But what that means for you is, once you close that repair permit, you can then go to an improvement permit, and there's no look back. You're resetting that calculation every time you close a permit and open another one.
Do you have to get an updated appraisal, or is it just, since it's not tied to an event?
You don't have to. It may behoove you to do so, depending on the improvements you intend to make. It may make sense for you to then get a permit.
You should be at your initial number anyway.
You
And
should.
once you get your SD done,
What he's saying
And
is,
then
if
after that, you
he's
can do
at
it.
49% now, right, then he's only doing that because if he were to do.
Cause I
add
gotta
the
wipe
bathroom-
the slate clean, right?
Yeah.
Because I wanna gut my bathroom and the kitchen, but that's gonna take me over, right? So I can't do it right now. So I gotta wipe the slate clean, and then once I do that, then I can go move forward and phase in whatever I wanna do.
Sure. So my presumption as you're saying this is that all of the work that you're doing under your repair permit is to return that home to its pre-damaged condition.
Correct.
And anything else that you're doing is because you have desired things to beautify your home or make other improvements that weren't caused by.
But I can't do that as part of the permit if it's
Correct.
gonna take me over the threshold.
So you close one and open another. Yep.
The other option is to also get a, third-party independent opinion, a FEMA appraisal from a licensed Florida appraiser, and see if you can use that. For almost every instance that I've seen, I think I've seen 1 in 1,000 that it did not help, but the other 999, it helped get them at least 50, sometimes even 100% more, sometimes even more than that. So if you did want to do all that together, so I think the last FEMA appraisal I saw was about $650. Kind of varies depending on the size of the house. A 1,000 square foot house is going to be less than a 3,000 square foot house. But that certainly can help if you don't want to just daisy chain things together, but rather just do it all at one time.
So if, in that case, if you somehow got that threshold, moved up and then all of a sudden those other capital improvements that I wanted to make still kept me, you could still submit that as part, you could do the repair and the improvement as
Yeah.
one package.
Yes.
Okay.
And so that way you're not tearing up your house twice,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
And for example, I did the independent appraisal as well, and my value, my SD was 63.9, and it's now at 29%. So it was a substantial difference.
And then the process between the property appraisers, BVR and getting a true private appraisal, what is this BVR? Somebody enlighten me, what are they doing there? Are they reconstructing the cost? Are they looking at the cost of the house again and like looking at the depreciation numbers or are they just kind of like, we got it right, sorry, kind of thing?
I just did one for a neighbor, so resident. I was
BVR.
helping them, yes.
Okay.
And I went online and did that, submitted photos and everything, and then I was talking to another person who said it takes a little longer to get that back than doing an independent. So we're figuring it might take like 3 weeks to get it back, but I put it in about a week ago for them. And but yes, they do that, they do require pictures for it. And then they do basically the same calculation, more or less. I don't know if it's gonna come out higher than an independent or lower than independent or right in line, but I'm figuring it's gonna help and it's free too.
That's what
It's free.
It's free.
And it's per Twitty's website, it's not supposed to count against anything, tax wise against you. So it's just a reevaluation.
And that number comes to me, not you guys, so I can just say, here, I've walked through the process and.
Yeah.
So if you're within like 5 or 10%, take the free option.
Yeah.
If you're at 60, 75, 80%, right, it might make sense to go through the independent appraisal, which also takes 2 weeks. So you're not saving a whole lot of time. But if it's a small amount, take the first option for free first,
Yeah.
right? And if that doesn't quite get you there, you always have the option of the appraisal route.
So far, I've only seen one BVR come in, it happened to be for a commercial structure. This structure was valued very, very low, but it did double the valuation. Now, I would say that that's based on a very, very low structure value of a commercial structure. It's the only one I've seen so far, so they're not highly prevalent, at least not yet, but
Yeah.
it was pretty significant for that
Plus, it
property.
required the homeowner to do all the legwork versus having somebody that's what they do day in, day out for a living. They just run 100 appraisals a day.
Last time I was here, I think somebody said that if you were less than 30%, that you did not need to submit an SI package, you were gonna go straight to permit. Is that still the case?
It is.
Okay.
We've moved that up as well internally. We're still sticking to that process officially, but in a lot of cases, if we've gotten information in a neighborhood that tells us a lot about what happened in that neighborhood, we can use some other sources of data to help us figure out if that property is likely to be under 50%. So what you just described is, so there's 3 streams of data, right? There's the building permit application that tells us what you plan to do. There's the SISD package that, FEMA requires or that we may require to get actual cost of repair. And then there's this SD estimate that Tidal Basin is doing. And so we have to have at least 2 pieces of that information. We're always gonna get a building permit application, of course, and we either have to have substantial damage estimate, or we have to have SISD package, or a combination of a lot of great information. After 4 months, we know what's really been occurring largely in many of these neighborhoods. We've seen other things, and we have access to ground elevation data. And so we can make some really good educated assumptions that it would be successful on appeal if you happen to get a substantial damage letter. So in some cases, we'll go above that 30%. So if you submit, your question was about not submitting an SISD. If you submit an SISD and that's below 30% or even below 50%, then we'll look at that. If we've gotten a substantial damage letter and it comes in below 50%, a non-substantial damage letter, if it's below 50%, if it's in that 40 2 to 50%, we're always gonna require an SISD package.
You're still gonna have to prove your, so.
Yeah. If you're below that, then we'll make some educated guesses based on other information that we have available to us. So there's definitely an art and a science to all of this.
Yeah, no doubt.
And then the other thing, I want you to hear what Denise is not saying. Right? We're not intentionally looking for reasons to deny permits.
Sure.
Right? We're not intentionally looking for things to create undue hardship. Right? If anything, we're looking at ways, okay, how can we streamline some of these processes? So the 30% we didn't have 2 months ago, right? That was a conversation we had and said, look, anybody that's at 30%, like there's too much of a gap here. It's 100% to 50% almost, right? There's a non-zero chance that it's going to come back. So let's move that through. So I don't want you to hear any of it say it's like no one's looking specifically for reasons, to force people to tear down, to force people to do things, if they want to keep their home, they want to rebuild it, right? We'll work with the residents within the parameters that we have to make sure that anybody who wants to rebuild can rebuild.
Nothing's ever easy, right? So if you were at 28% and you said, okay, I got this, right? And then you said, oh, back to my other thing, while I'm at it, I need to gut this bathroom, I want to do this, this, and this. Now, all of a sudden, your new capital improvements take you up to some 46%. Now you're gonna come back to me and say, you need an SD package.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right, okay.
Yes. Without doubt.
But almost every single case, you're almost better off in that case, just do it all at one time, right?
I agree with you.
It's a vanity.
Especially if you're doing your own work, I mean,
Especially if you're not living in a house right now.
so many
like
things that
tearing
you
up
can take
bathrooms
care
and
of while
kitchens.
this is all going on.
So one of the things that I've certainly been so impressed with since I joined on September 30th. So, I wasn't here for Helene, as you know, but seeing the damage and the mountain that we have climbed, this commission has been so strong in their messaging about making sure that we're FEMA compliant, that we don't risk our CRS rating. We don't put ourselves in a position where FEMA is coming after us. We don't put ourselves in a position where we lose our rating and lose our ability to get flood insurance and all the other benefits that come with being a member of that. And our city manager has been really collaborative. We have daily operations meeting with our leadership team and community development. And the questions we're asking ourselves all the time is, what does this look like a year or 3 years from now when FEMA comes in? Are we protecting our community? Are we making a complete file? Are we using sound principles and practices? What FEMA tells us all the time is that it's consistency and that it's equitably applied across the entire community. And so we have to be very careful that if we're putting policies in place that affect someone or a class of someone's, like condo buildings or whatever, that it is equitably applied and that it's defendable in all cases so that we can move through these processes, so that we can make these adjustments. And we make them almost daily, by the way, as more information comes in. Matter of documenting the reasoning behind it so that we can show how we're complying and how we're applying that equitably going forward. So it's been an extraordinary lift. It's been incredibly beneficial. This has been the most collegial group of men and women on this commission that have hung together through very, very difficult decision-making processes. And it's been really beneficial to us as staff to have that clarity of purpose and direction as we move through this, because it's been a challenge would be an understatement, for sure.
Luke, I have a question for you. So, did you have another question?
I can keep going, yeah.
Well, I had a question from a resident that they emailed right before this meeting, and I thought mine was the last one since I have you here. And I think it was the last email you and I exchanged, probably about 4:30, 5 o'clock. So in this scenario, the owner had, as you mentioned, flooding and then a fire event. And so I think that the question for him, and I've talked, unfortunately, to half a dozen owners who are in a very similar situation that have had, either flood the first time and then significant wind damage the second time. So roof windows are gone, whether it's flood, whether it's fire, whether it was wind. So if somebody was in a situation where, look, it's going to take me the 3 to 6 months just to get plans from an architect and engineer. What can they stagger it where they apply for windows and roof permit to secure the property from further water intrusion, from further damage? So at least the structure is secure, and then apply for the substantial damage package? Or do they have to do it all at one time and then wait for 6 months before they do the roof and the windows?
No, they can apply for the permits separately. The one thing that we want to be careful of is altogether of the damages exceeding 49%. So in that scenario, we've got to be careful, because the last thing I want to do is, oh yeah, sure, go ahead, spend $20,000 on your windows or your roof, and then, oh, well, actually, you're over 50%, now you got to elevate it or demolish it. And I want to try to minimize or eliminate those potentials there. So that would need to be addressed. But with that being said, hypothetically, if somebody is over 50% and they're just trying to do something to secure the property, I would be of the mindset, excuse me, I would be of the mindset that if they sign, it really wouldn't be a temporary occupancy permit, but along with that permit, we get an affidavit saying I accept all responsibility. So if they're saying, I just want to secure my structure, and they provide us with that affidavit saying, I take full responsibility, I understand that I could be over 50%, then I'd be willing to go down that road and, allow them to, in this scenario, put windows in. And then once they get through their process and they get engineered drawings for their trusses or whatever, then, we can move forward.
So there's a process where we're willing to work with the homeowners as long as they understand the potential associated risk with it.
Correct.
And again, part of the conversations we've had as a commission is to make sure that everybody, it's my house, I'm an adult, I need to be able to make decisions about my house. And if I'm willing to assume that risk, right, then what you're saying is, in this scenario, if you want to assume that risk that potentially something might happen where it takes you over, right, you find out all of a sudden that all of your trusses are completely non-functional and the whole roof structure has to come off, and that's going to be $150,000 if you weren't planning on. That's the risk that you assume.
But you still need a permit. And
Yeah,
then,
no, absolutely. Yeah, no, no,
yes,
sure.
well, I think that email communication was somebody trying to protect your windows and doors in without a permit, and they hadn't even applied for a permit.
I read it differently.
Okay.
It sounded like he was told he had to submit the complete package with windows and roof as part of it, when he wasn't quite at the stage where he could do all the other stuff. Yes, John?
But of course, I mean, if your elevation certificate shows that you're in compliant, this whole 50% stuff is going to be moved.
Yeah, if we're talking about a structure that meets all the criteria, it's elevated or, it's fully compliant, then there is no 50%. You could throw as much money at it as you want.
That's a different scenario. than you
Yeah.
probably did
Yeah.
before.
Totally different scenario.
Then you're probably dealing with wind damage anyway, but
That's just a wind damage.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions for some residents, specifically in Adonsassar and Bella Vista. But I'm gonna start with the first one, which was for the letter, the determination letter. Because all of us are comparing our letters now.
Sure.
Right, so a lot of people in the Don and the Bella Vista section that floods the most, right, the lower lying areas. That percentage, just to be communicating correctly, is strictly just the structure of the building, not damages outside of the building, not your pool, not your seawall, not your fences, okay.
Not your boat
And
dock,
this-
people that find those
Correct.
things. Yeah, you're
Which I communicated that, but that's when we all start like, well, then why are you 20% and why are you 60? We both have the same type of house, is it because you lost it? I say, okay, you might need to appeal this. So I hope that's the way to
Sure.
steer, because for the most part, we all had the same. So that's one. The next one, in a neighborhood, that has sustained storms in the past. And this is also to help the city in preparing for the unfortunate, if it were to happen again, scenario, right? And the people who are repairing their homes currently now, which is pretty much a good 80–90% of the city, right? So, but we're in a neighborhood that's had prior storms and had substantial damage as well, and flooding and so forth, had to deal with FEMA and the whole thing. And I can give an example of my home as well, because when I repaired my home 2 years ago, right, for the first time, we're doing what a lot of people right now are doing is replacing or repairing to be able to sustain another event, right? If we were to get flooded again, we don't use drywall in the homes, right? A lot of us have used vinyl siding instead, to replace and we're talking about homes on stilts. They do sell product for homes that are at first level. One, and I'm not trying to sell it, okay, but Enduraflood is one, I don't know if any of you have already seen it, but there's other ones that are coming out already, right? So these people make things that look nice, you can put in your home, and they can get wet, you can take them out, air dry, and put them back up. So they're not, in my case, and many people who got damaged, didn't really get damaged. It's more like we gotta clean up, right? We've got to pull the stuff out. Like if you see my house, you'll see all the border around where I have removed. Unfortunately, I use wood paneling. Don't use wood paneling. Because 2 days outside not being able to come in, like prior storms, we were able to immediately get it out and dry it. But if you're not able to get back within 24 hours, you're gonna get mold on the wood. So, but anyway, so we're set up to just remove the panel, put it back. So our costs are different, or our scenarios are different. You know, we don't have electric on the bottom. We've already replaced it in the past. We've already cut coming from the top. So again, thinking, is that why our percentages are off? Because we're being, you know, it's kind of like you guys just got it for the first time, but we really didn't. This is not our first rodeo, right? So with that, when we submit, and a lot of the homes are stilt homes to get permits, it's not so much, it's not damaged. It's kind of like, well, I got to replace the wood one that got damaged, but it's just a replacement. Everything is already there. Is that different? Is that a permit, or is that just, hey, I had to just go buy another vinyl panel and just put it in where the other one was before?
So to back up, as far as differences between, you know, the estimated damages to one house compared to the other, I can't really comment on that. I'd have to see the two and compare, and probably make a site visit just to see, okay, why they do this, why they do that. So to compare two, it's difficult because, you know, one house might have a higher grade or a lower grade. We see that throughout the city. You know,
They have a different structure value.
or
So even if you have the same cost of repairs, your structure value
Could have been
There's
different.
gonna
could have been different.
change
A
that
block
percentage.
house versus a frame house, and the cost difference is 100%.
Yeah, well, these are all wood frames.
Yeah.
We're comparing.
Depends on what your starting structure value is.
But that's a good, yeah.
there are a lot of factors. As far as, you know, replacing materials, if it's a matter of pulling something off, cleaning it, make sure there's no mold, and then
Right,
putting it back up.
immediately.
You know, if it's just paneling, yeah, we gotta deal with this on a case by case basis, because somebody say, oh, well, she didn't need a permit for this. But in a scenario where somebody is saying, hey, I just gotta pull these panels off, clean it, and then put it back up. You know, if somebody comes to me and asks me that, I'll say, sure, no problem. It might require a site visit to see exactly what's going on.
But would
but
you need
with
a
some-
permit though?
Well, that's what I'm saying
Okay.
is, you know, with a site visit, I could make a determination. So you're
Well,
just
many
pulling it
people
up,
are
cleaning
doing it,
it.
is what I'm
and-
saying, like, they're not thinking they have to come for a permit.
Yeah,
just
in
cleaning,
some,
they're just
in some scenarios, a permit would be required depending upon exactly what they're doing. In other scenarios, if it's just minor work, then, you know, potentially waive the permit requirement. But it's on a case by case basis.
Because
And
and
that's
I
the
say
other-
this with the future, like even in a home that might be at grade, you know, at foundation, right? If new homeowners right now are doing that type of, like Enduraflood, like I mentioned, and you were to have another event, you know, and then you might not have the answer, I'm not saying you have the answer, but I'm just trying to think ahead. If it were to happen and some people are like, hey, I had my Enduraflood and I pulled it back and I stuck it back in, I'm good to go, I'm living inside, I don't need to get a permit. That's what I bought, you know, that's what I already had lifted my electrical, I've already prepared my home. Now we're gonna get a determination letter that might say you're 50% damage, and you're like, wait a minute, I already spent on my firestorm enough to, I don't wanna say flood proof, but improve to be able to sustain the damage.
And in that scenario, appeal the
Appeal the
damages.
decision. Okay.
We
So that
will
will probably be the
Yep,
process.
we will reassess it, and you can, that way you can be face to face with an inspector and they can make that determination, okay, was it assessed wrong? you know, if, when these inspectors came out, if they saw an enclosed area on the ground floor, they might or might not be able to tell if it's living area or what's there. So there are certain assumptions that they have to go by, and they're just going at the best of their ability and knowledge in construction. So, there are some assumptions that need to be made, but yeah, and just keep in mind that, and this is for everybody, if you get a letter, whether it's substantial or non-substantial, you can appeal it. And we have some that got letters that say, I didn't get any flood waters, so we can reassess that. So, but the process would be to file for appeal, and we can go through that process.
And then for those products that you mentioned, right, so we've had this conversation specifically about those types of products. So the manufacturer, it has to be compliant for the building code, right? So almost every manufacturer will have somewhere on the website, will have documentation. So that when, if you do decide to use that type of product and the first time you will need a permit, we establish that, is make sure you include that documentation with your application, because otherwise they're gonna look at it and say, okay, well, what is this product? You know, what is this thing? But if it's got the documentation, so they'll usually say it's fire rated, they'll say it's, you know, Florida, you know, building code compliant. It's in the documentation. That's one more step that you can use, because that type of product is easily, it's very, you know, homeowner friendly if you want to do the work yourself. But just make sure that's one more step you have to include, so that you're not, don't get stuck in a situation where it gets kicked back and now you're waiting for that. So those are options. As long as you understand some of the nuances with those options, there's just one extra step for those.
I can say just for the neighborhoods in my district, in those particular neighborhoods that had that amount, we had the same amount of flood. Well, let me say the same. This time was a good 4 feet. Back then, almost 3 in some homes, right? But the process wasn't there. We didn't have those steps. We didn't have the good processes that have been put in place now, let's just say. So someone would have to do an appeal or be able to explain, because those steps weren't there before, you know, and I don't even know if Ondura, I think whoever back then came up with it probably went through the, you know, got a new business now, let's just say.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it existed, but everybody had the same ideas. Well, why are we gonna put drywall? We shouldn't be putting drywall. We should be, you know, using something that would be able to sustain this, and, you know, so all that started coming out, but,
There's also a difference between the first floors that are not, you
The
know,
living
living areas
areas,
versus the ones that are living areas. So that's why you have to have that for the building code, the fire rating, all the other things that
well,
a
not just
normal
the
PVC
board, too.
panel, because you can buy PVC panels at Home Depot, but that's not the same thing,
Yeah.
right?
A lot of us use cement board. I'll be one that we did, and it's an open space in the back, and they're perfect. No water on the wood, the studs, nothing. So, you know, we all kind of compared notes, like, hey, how did you fare this time? You know, because we kind of used some of those things. So I know she had a question in the
I
back.
have a question. If you get an significant damage letter, and what is the best way to appeal it? The damage letter stated I had a lot more water than I had. It was nothing, it was way out of whack. And so which way do I appeal it? How?
So you can appeal it in one of 2 ways. So if we're looking at percentage, so here's the value of the structure and here's the estimated damages. So you can appeal the damages to try to bring that down, to try to make that percentage lower, or you can take the value of the structure and see if you know, if you get an appraiser, a licensed appraiser, create a private appraisal for that property, then that can also spread the distance more and bring those numbers down. So either way would satiate that. You know, sometimes I think Mayor touched on it before, sometimes the appraisal isn't quite enough when we have an extreme amount of damages. So it may take both, but you know,
Also,
then
if it's just a matter of, if the letters that, you know, if you think that they assume you had 3 feet and you had 6 inches, right? A lot of times, the easiest way to do it is, we have that SD
Appeal.
appeals. If you have pictures and video, send those in.
Pictures, King, they're
Yeah.
wonderful.
If you can show where the water line was and you can see clearly you didn't get above the outlets. You know, if you didn't get above the outlets, in most of those cases, you're gonna be somewhere 25% or less. Yeah.
I did send that. Okay. And then they said I needed to fill out a FEMA package.
Possibly so. So we have volunteers who can help with that 91 Monday through Friday right here. They're your friends and neighbors who are gonna help you out with that. And if they have questions, they'll come see us.
Why would you have to fill that out if you have pictures that show that it's less than 6 inches?
My guess is, and I obviously don't know your file, but my guess is if you sent that in, then we probably reran some calculations and it probably came up significant enough where we need to either increase structure value or we need a detailed listing of your actual cost of repairs. There's something in there that's telling us that we need more information, really to protect you and make sure that if we issue permits, you're not gonna trigger the 50% threshold. Yeah.
So then you would go with getting a higher appraisal.
That's often a path that people go, but we can do the other route as well.
What percentage were you at, if you don't mind me asking?
63.9.
My recommendation would be, if you just give, in the appeal, just give the amount of damages, we'll have an inspector come out and do an assessment, and we can reassess those numbers.
Okay, so how do I get to that point to have an inspector?
Tonight's your lucky night.
And that's why we're doing these town hall meetings, so that we can actually get.
You give me your contact information, and I'll set that in motion.
Yeah, generally speaking, though, sdappeal@stbeach.org, you can send an email, just ask those kinds of questions and we can respond and offer some guidance. And that would probably become part of that.
Yes.
Can I just say, isn't the number almost irrelevant? She's saying 63%. So, okay, so what if it's 22%? What if it's 89%? If you're submitting a budget and you're, right, it's all about the math, right? So everybody's getting caught up in this percentage of damage.
You're correct. It doesn't.
Do I have that right? Okay,
So that's the reason why about almost 2 months ago, we had that conversation right here in chambers. And we had this conversation with Denise back and forth, the commission with the staff and said, look, if the process of appealing the number to get it below 50% is a package and appraisal, your contractor bids, pictures, videos, all that stuff. If I have that now and I don't have the letter, can I move forward with permits? And that was one of the changes that we made and said, look, let's not wait for the letter, right? Because like you said, in most of those cases, it's gonna be under 50%. If you have all the documentation that you would use in the future for an appeal, well, let's just use that documentation now, apply for the permit, and let's move forward.
right, but if it's let's say it's 87%, and I submit all of my documents that show that I'm well, like that number just doesn't make, it doesn't, it's not,
Yeah, it doesn't.
Okay.
it doesn't matter.
It's just math, and as long as you make the math work, it doesn't matter what the letter says.
Okay.
But it needs to be provided to us in sufficient detail where we
Of
feel
course.
confident in
You gotta do
documenting
your
that
own work
file.
and like, oh.
And if you're submitting an SD package, you're gonna have all that groundwork done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and so whether you do your contractor, somebody has already done it, and if it comes in at 40%, then it really will be on us to prove that it's not 40%, but 86%.
Right.
And again, we're not here to keep people from moving back into their homes. If anything, we want to make sure that, again, this is why we're doing these meetings. We've had one every month for the last 5 months, sometimes twice a month, to make sure that everybody has resources. We have 35, 38 volunteers. Again, that's one of the things, that was one of the changes to make sure that people can move forward.
I have a question for you. As far as,
I hope you can see.
on the FEMA, doing an ACV, doing a private appraisal, independent private appraisal, doing as a FEMA ACV appraisal. Under the cost source data, are you accepting local builder?
I have,
Okay.
so I don't see too many of them, but I have accepted those.
What are they? Are they typically using like Marshall and Swift or something
Well,
like some?
Oh, sorry.
No, I
Yeah.
didn't actually, are those what the acceptable, is the appraisal quoting those as data sources then, or?
So I'm not the one that looks at all of them, so I can't give you statistics as far as how many come in with this or that, but I look at relatively few of them. That's typically what the plant examiners or the the team that's working on substantial damage terminations, they're looking at them. But when it comes down to it, if we have a licensed appraiser, they have a license and rules and regulations they've got to follow, and they're justifying their, how they're coming up with these numbers, whatever, because there's a number of different ways they can justify it. If they're justifying them and, technically I can't question legally, what the amount is. I can question their methods, their methodology, but, I have yet to do that. I haven't seen anything that has been that questionable where I'm like, okay, now you're way out in left field here.
But I assume they're quoting a data, they're not just quoting they've got to be quoting some data source in the appraisal. Probably you'd have to look through the 20 pages or whatever.
They can't just pick a number out of the air and say, yeah, this one looks good.
Or I talked to someone, I did a poll of 7 builders in the area and I took an average of, what it costs, what new construction in a flood zone is.
Well, I've seen it range anywhere from Craftsman Book at $213 a square foot to owner builder at $350 a square foot.
Okay.
I mean, a local builder. And that's a huge difference when you're calculating for an ACV and trying to get your threshold up.
Sure.
Huge.
No doubt.
All right, any other
I can
questions?
ask another question.
Sure.
I promise I won't keep you here that long. This is
Everybody's probably benefiting from them, so.
Well, I'm sure, as you can tell, I'm a bit of a detailed person, so, this issue with the 60 days of, requesting for the reevaluation, this is just my own curiosity. A lot of these letters were issued in, early to mid-December. So as the clock starts ticking on this 60 days,
Yeah.
what happens? Let's just say some homeowner, just blows it off and just does not, you don't hear anything from them. Are you done now? How are you handling that?
No, so, when we talked about this at commission as well, so what the primary objective is we need to get communication back from those who have been substantially damaged to understand what their intention is going forward. Because Luke is obligated as floodplain manager to make sure he's enforcing floodplain rules. So if you've been substantially damaged, he needs to see compliance. So if you've been non-responsive in your permit activity, et cetera, we need to hear from you. So we gave a 60-day window to let us know to appeal or to request an extension. And that extension does not have a time limit, which is interesting, right? And we did that intentionally as well, because we know that some folks need to know whether or not they're gonna have the ability to get grants that are now going to be made available at some point from the state. So there's a lot of homework that we recognize they may need to do if they are considering demolition and elevation of their home. So we know that that can take a significant amount of time. The objective in putting that 60-day window on there is to keep it top of mind so you're communicating with us to let us know where your head is at. And then we'll figure out the rest of it. We'll have, okay, they told us, within 60 days that they plan to consider elevation. We'll just check in with them along the way or notify them of the application opening up and they should apply and things like that. So it's really just opening up a way of communication. What we can't really have is complete, we can't have them ignore that letter indefinitely because he's obligated to make sure it's enforced.
And so what happens now? Like what, you don't have, there's nothing in the ordinance or nothing that.
No, there's no plan.
At some point, you're screwed, like you're drop dead.
At some point, we'll initiate code enforcement action on it, because then it's a derelict property at some point, so at some point, we have no plans to do so, but, if we haven't heard from you after 60 days, at some point, we'll reach out and say, let us know your plans, but it's really just encouraging people while it's top of mind, communicate with us and let us know what you're thinking.
So let's say from a buyer's perspective, if you were thinking about buying one of these remediated houses and you had not heard anything from the previous homeowner and their 60 days expired, and let's say you're 90 or 100 days in and the new owner comes in and says, hey, I need an extension on all this. I got a plan. You're gonna work with that.
Absolutely.
With that new buyer, right?
Absolutely.
Upon a transfer of ownership.
Yes, absolutely.
And then the date that's in that letter, in the SD letter, where all that stuff has to get done, right? Raising, you're gonna be able to extend that date out as well, I assume then, right?
Certainly.
Okay.
The goal is always compliance, it's never enforcement, we just need to be able to communicate. That would be, whether it's a debris case or whatever, just talk to our code enforcement officers, just talk to our billing official. Because we have some legal obligations, we need to make sure that we're having an open line of communication, so we know the path forward.
And then the two, administrative appeal and public hearing with Board of Adjustment, that's like, you're always gonna go administrative appeal first, and then if that doesn't work out, then it's upon the onus is on the homeowner to go to the public hearing.
Correct,
Correct.
I can say that we're probably a long time away from going through a Board of Adjustment process, because most people are still in this administrative appeals phase.
Okay.
And I would anticipate that we'll have very few reasons to take it through a Board of Adjustment, but if we're at a point where we are not moving off of a substantial damage determination, and that's largely gonna come from probably structural damage, things like that.
Right.
Then, I'm sure we'll have a few cases that go to a public hearing, it's a, quasi judicial hearing, and it's not us making those decisions, it's the board of.
neighbors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
neighbors.
And I read the decisions are final, right? So that's
Once it
the
goes
end
to
of the
Board of
line there, so. Okay.
Well, and I think the important thing also for anyone to remember who's in a position of like, I don't know what I'm doing yet, this is overwhelming, I got this letter, I don't know what to do with it. This is too much. The first step for anybody in that position is to reach out to one of us, like if you're in our district, great. If you're not in our district, but you find whichever one of our phone number, email address first, that's fine too. But I mean, that's one of the things that we're all here for, is so that somebody can just be like, this is too much, I can't figure it out, I don't wanna go sit in line at City Hall for 3 hours to try to figure it out. Reach out to one of us and we can help walk through the process and figure it out.
And that was another reason for the volunteer program, which is a great program. They'll help you and assist you through the initial phases as well, getting you going, give you some direction on that.
And it's less intimidating as well, because these are your neighbors.
And they
So
get you in quickly too. I mean,
There's no line, there's no line
to
for
talk to them.
volunteers.
They've got all the forms and everything. Great bunch of people. They're, Denise has done a wonderful job on the guide and getting them trained. So they're able to get you going. So don't, if you're looking for some more info, come on in, because they're here 9 to 1 and they're like, shit, there's no line. So it's great.
We've also seen a lot less foot traffic in our lobby the last week and a half. I thought maybe it was because we got through the cold snap and people are deciding to be outside. I'm not sure if that's it. I think either people are just really becoming informed. They're talking to people who've been through a process. People are just getting more comfortable with it, I think. Still gathering information, but we do not have at least right now, we certainly do not have the lines that we have experienced for the last several months. So I would suggest if you do need to talk to permit intake, at this point anyway, you probably do not have a very lengthy wait.
Can I ask one last quick question? I promise I'll be done. On the owner builder, when you close out that owner builder permit to get it back to pre-storm, my understanding is you can't sell the property for a year. Who's enforcing that? And is that a FEMA? What did I say?
You can't sell or lease.
Sell or lease, right? So are you guys enforcing that, or is that a FEMA thing?
Florida statute.
It's statute, Florida statute.
That's Florida law.
Okay.
Basically, if you want, Florida law wants you to live in your own mistakes and make sure that that structure is safe.
It's a trade-off, right? So you're trading off some savings by doing the sweat equity yourself.
Right.
But it also comes with some responsibility, right? So you're taking upon yourself to make sure that you understand the permitting process, the inspection process, for the building code. And then one of the limitations on that is the purchase and leasing property. Like Denise said, make sure you look at your own mistakes for at least a year.
The unfortunate thing about that is that,
Sorry.
well, I was gonna say, the unfortunate thing about that is I think that state statute was put in place because certainly, 15 years ago, there were so many people flipping houses in Florida and doing a terrible job and, selling these horrible problems. Well, now all those same people who are flipping houses and doing a terrible job are still doing that. They just got their own contractor's licenses. So I think, I don't know that it fixed the problem.
There's a question on that, just so that I'm clear too. Is it all types of permits? Because let's say you pull a permit for your electrical, but it's not homeowner, you know, it's an electrician who pulled it, a plumber pulled one. Someone who installs doors or windows, they pulled it for that. But then now you pull a permit because you want to replace the vinyl siding that you washed and dried and you put it back in. Does that ding you that you can't sell your home for that one little permit would do that? Wow. Because it's not, you know, like in the state, but
Yeah.
but it's not electrical, it's not
Right, it's not a
plumbing,
life
it's not-
safety, yeah.
Right.
The statute doesn't refine or exempt certain permits. It just says, you know, so if you look at the beginning of that statute, it says all work shall be done by a contractor with certain exceptions, and then a homeowner can act as their own contractor. So it's an exception to that requirement of being a contractor. So when that exception is made, then there's those criteria that have to be met. You can't sell it, you can't lease it, you can't rent it in the next 12 months. So it doesn't specify what types of work, it just says any.
I was thinking you're a good tiler and you tile your, you know, you do your, well, I don't know what.
But you don't need permits for tile, so you can.
No, I know, I'm just trying to think of something, well, that's why I said, like, if you pull for, not drywall, but you're replacing
think-
vinyl.
I think Betty, that
Mhm.
or Commissioner Nikki, I think that in that case you're talking about like the different flood panels and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it probably doesn't apply the way it should to everybody in your neighborhood because they might not have gotten a permit the first time, right?
Exactly.
You know, the first time they flooded. But for most people, I think, and Luke can correct me if I'm way off base, but I think the way it would work for most people is that you would go, okay, I'm not gonna put drywall back in, I'm gonna put this paneling in. And you would get a permit for that. And so the installation of that initially would have been inspected. And so then the next time you flood, you're not installing, you are disassembling, cleaning and reassembling. And that probably wouldn't require a permit. And so, you know, if somebody had a permit from a year ago that showed that this paneling was installed and inspected, then the next time when you're just taking it out and cleaning it and putting it back in, there would be no requirement for there to be a permit for that because you're not installing something.
That's
But
probably
I
a
was
good way
like
to look
saying,
at
like,
it.
you know, the
That's
mayor
how it is.
said, indoor, it's fairly simple, right, you're very handy, right? Then you would think, I could do it myself, yeah, there's nice instructions, it tells you how to put it together, but now you're dinged, right, like.
Yeah, and depending
And I don't really know who
on,
pulls that you would have to have a contractor, right? Like that would remove it. You can't use a handyman per se to do
To install it the first time.
the first time,
Yeah,
is what I'm saying.
yeah.
Jumping back briefly to owner builder permits, if you have a property that's in trust, depending on how that trust is structured, you may be able to pull a permit as an owner builder, but you would need to go through a process with the property appraiser's office to get a trust verification letter. And so they're gonna need to look at trust documents to homestead that property and then make it available as, you can then apply it as an owner builder permit. So I just wanted to put that out there. If there's anybody that has a property in trust, there may be a pathway to pull owner builder.
Yeah. and
Every
just,
scenario is coming up.
Yeah.
you know, really kudos needs to go to the property appraiser because they've done a lot of things like this evaluation of trust, the assessment of value. They've done a lot to help alleviate some of these stresses from property owners. Even with condominiums, they've applied values to condos where they didn't exist before. So I honestly don't know how they're doing it, but they really bent over backwards, and they're supporting the whole county, so.
They got a bigger staff,
They're doing it.
I'm just gonna say, a much bigger staff.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. We're doing these town halls on a regular basis. So look for that on the city calendar. And then tomorrow night, we have a District 2 Town Hall meeting right here, 5 o'clock,
No, library.
at the library at 5 o'clock. And then on February 11th, back here in Chambers, 6 PM for the next commission meeting. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.